We are rounding out the end of the day. We have two more presentations. This next one I am so excited for. We've eaten into a little bit over time, but we're going to be covering a lot. She's going to be covering a lot, and I'm going to be keeping up. I hope you are too. Keep up the energy too. Hey, Renee.
Hello, Dawn. Hello, everybody. Super excited to be here and do a bunch of stuff, as you said. So keen to get going.
Yeah, this one's going to be a little bit longer than most of them. There'll be a 45-minute one, but we have a lot of information to cover, and you're such a dynamic speaker. So I'll see you in a minute.
Fantastic. Okay. Get my slides up, hopefully. There we go. Oh, no, they've gone away. Thank you. Then maybe coming back again. There we go. Thank you, behind the scenes team. And I'm super excited to be here today. As Dawn said, I'm Renee Noble. I'm a senior cloud advocate at Microsoft in the Python Cloud Advocacy team. So excited to be here talking about Python and Azure on Python Azure Developer Day as part of this event. And I'm going to help you build your first full stack Python web app, or maybe, your fifth or your 10th, or maybe you just kind of want to come along for the ride and see how I might go about doing a very basic one to show you how to put the pieces together of a Python web app. So let's get started. So what are we going to learn today? We're going to learn how to build a basic, lightweight, toy web app with Python and Flask, as well as front end, and we're going to deploy it and do all the stuff. I say toy because this is just like a fun project that's really good to see how all the bits come together. It's not necessarily a thing that you want to have like 100,000 people going and using this website. Maybe 1,000 might also be pushing the limits of like the practicalities of what we're actually going to implement as part of this project. But we're going to see how all the different bits and pieces come together. That includes how to deploy and store data using Azure Cloud. And I'm going to include a few tips along the way for making your first web app or your 50th web app, for things you might want to consider making it a bit more robust when you actually go and put something out that you want people to use, or just generally for good security practices and things like that along the way. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into making a web app. You might have been like, I don't really know where to start. It's a bit overwhelming, and that is fair, because you can see this list, which I'll go through in a second, of all the bits of technology that it's going to take to make a web app. So is it going to take a lot of tech? Yes, but I'm here to hopefully help you through the hardest part, which is all the glue of sticking it together in the right ways. And then hopefully we'll be comfy using GitHub and code spaces, or VS Code, whichever you like. Code spaces is a very great way to do it in the browser. Python and Flask. HTML with Ginger 2 templates. So that's the templating engine that's part of Flask. CSS, just a little bit of JavaScript, and then deploying it to Azure App Services and using Azure Storage, some Blob storage. So these are the bits we're going to use. You don't need to be super familiar with them. I will note, if you are like, this is super useful, but also that's like a lot of stuff to do in a 45-minute time slot, I do have 4 episodes, 1 hour each, where I go through this more slowly. So if you want to take what you see here and then be like, yeah, that was cool. How do I actually do all the bits and go through it? I live code the whole thing. You can go and watch a series, which I'll give you a link for at the end of this session, where I break it down. But we're going to give the express version today. So firstly, let's say, what is a web app? Because we've been on the internet, but there's different kinds of pages out there. You might go and look at a travel blog or something, for instance. You're like, yeah, someone has put in some information. There's a little story here, but it never changes. That's what we call a static web app. And potentially it doesn't use any other APIs or nifty tricks that pull in new data, and it could always just be the same. Something that can be a web app can just run on the front end. So that could just be like, you're getting the HTML, your CSS, and your JavaScript, and it could run the whole thing there. And something like Wordle, which people are probably fairly familiar with, can run on the front end. Of course, there's a server in the back end, or somehow to give you the files that comes over the internet that gets to you. And then your browser is going to compile those bits and pieces together to display the website. And you can interact with a web app. So as opposed to a static page where you can just read the contents, a web app will have some sort of interactivity. So when you're doing Wordle, you're going to put in your guesses. It's going to tell you which letters you got right, and ultimately if you got the right answer. So there you've got some interactivity. But sometimes we're going to need a little bit more than the stuff we can just do on the front end. So when is when front end isn't enough, what are some scenarios for that? And when do we need to talk about a full stack solution? Something that you might want different options for are if you have different views, for instance. You might have your users and you might have administrators. So we're going to need to be delivering 2 different sites depending on if someone is logged in as an as an administrator. You might have some database information. So you might have a social media profile and you want to go, okay, I'm going to grab the photo for this person's profile and I'm going to grab some information about them. And then we're going to display that. We're going to put it all together. We're going to render a template of what a profile looks like. And we're going to deliver that for the profile that's been asked for. We might also have secret information. So you might be running an exam online and you want to show people the questions, but you don't want to show them the answers that will automatically be marked on the back end. Something like Wordle, at least I haven't looked at the deployment recently, but when it was first created, you could just look into the JavaScript and go, oh, hey, today's answer is start, and then tomorrow's answer is lunch, things like that. So you could just look through that code, and if you wanted to cheat, you could. But if you're running an exam, you don't want people to be able to look up those answers. So we need to have that secret information on the back end, and the marking needs to happen on the back end, not up front on the front end, where people can just go right click, inspect element, and find out all the secrets that you're keeping there. So we can see here in this burger picture, there's a lot of things that could go into a full stack solution. And I've circled just the things that we're going to be using today. You could have a full stack solution that used all of these different bits and pieces, but you don't need to, especially if it's your first time or it's you're early in your full stack journey. So we're going to just be using a few bits and pieces today for the different layers. So we've got our front-end technologies. We've got REST, which is how we're going to be sending signals from the back end to the front end. And then we've got Azure, where we're going to deploy all this stuff. Let's now look at how this all fits together. We've got our front end. We've talked a bit about that. We've got a few files there going to get rendered together in the browser so you can see stuff. We've got the back end now, and we've got our web server, and we've got data storage. So our web server, we're going to be running something in Python, and then data storage is where we're going to be storing things. And there's going to be a few different options for that. And then they connect via the internet or some sort of network, not necessarily the internet. Before we go further, let's actually talk about what we're going to be making today, and we can then see how this all relates to this. So, a more tangible example. We're going to be making a party invitation website. It's going to be all right. It's not going to be the best invitation you've ever received to a party, but at least the form where you make the invitation doesn't look that great. We're going to be doing some CSS, but the rest of it is an exercise in homework for the user, because we just want to see the bare essentials of how we can get away with making a website, because the rest of it is just doing more of the stuff we've already done. And we don't need to see all of that. Otherwise, it's just like, that's a lot of code. Okay, so here we go. We've got our make our invitations form. That's our first page. Then we're going to have our see invitations page. We're going to view the content that's got, we've got some of the stuff coming out of this form, like who's coming to the party, what the party is about, when it is. We're going to display that with some different fun themes as we can see we're choosing our styles. Then we also want to be able to see a list of the different events. And finally, we're going to want to see who has responded yes for attending an event. You can actually check this all out if you want to at this link, and you can have a play around with that yourself. So before we get started, let's look at this in halves of what the different technologies we're going to be using. So firstly, let's talk a little bit about the front end. We're not going to actually live code the things today because I do only have 45 minutes, but we will go and look through the code. And firstly, let's talk about HTML. That's going to have our content and our structure. So this might have the words that you want to be displaying on the page. It will also have tags that say, this is a heading, this is a paragraph, this is a container of sorts that groups these bits together. Things like that. Here's an image, this is a link. So we've got that going on there. Then we've got CSS. This is the stuff that makes it look pretty. It controls things like making the font green or big or this style of font. It also controls the flow and the layout of how things appear on the page, and does things like if I hover on a link, then it turns purple. Things like that. You can control all of that in CSS. And it's really cool because you can have the exact same HTML for a website, and CSS can change the flow of it entirely. So these two examples, you would use the same content, but the CSS would be able to change the vibe and how it comes together completely. So you can see that's the same, but quite different. Finally, on the front end, we have JavaScript, or JS for short. Not to be confused with Java, which is a different thing. So that's my hot tip for you. Don't get those ones confused. They're quite different languages and used for different stuff. We use JavaScript to add functionality to the elements of the page. So you can actually grab an element and say, hey, this thing, I want to be able to change it dynamically. For instance, if we're playing Wordle, we might enter some letters for our word, and we may make the guess. You're actually going to change the color on the keyboard of things that you've already guessed and how they went in the word. So this, using JavaScript, makes things dynamic, makes them changing. You can use it to get data from the backend. It's a great way to interact with the backend with not using just standard forms and things like that. So that's what we're going to be using it for today. So as part of this project, we're going to use some basic HTML forms, as well as some HTML Ginger 2 templates for creating our invitations and our event lists. We'll also use CSS to make it a little bit prettier, and some JavaScript to actually send through those RSVPs. The back end. Okay, this is going to be our web server. This is how we're actually saying, hey, have some of our website. Here are some files. This is the stuff you need. And it's also going to do the work to work with the data that we've got those RSVPs coming in. So we also need that somewhere to store those RSVPs, and we've got a few different options for what we can do there. So firstly, our web server is saying, okay, I want to go to this page or that page. And it's like, oh, great. Here are the files you need for that page. Here are the files you need for this page. You might also need to fill out a template with some data when you are going to pull that different route. So we're saying, okay, we've got this stuff from the form and I want to create an invitation. I'm going to fill out a template. I'm going to put that data in, and then I'm going to, once it's already complete, send it off to the front end. We're going to use the backend also to access and store data and interact with our data storage solution. And if you want to, on a backend, you can use APIs as well to use other people's data or other services that already exist. A backend just needs to be on the net, I'm going to say. That could be the internet, the World Wide Web, or it could be on a local network. You can run a server off your own computer, and if you just want to serve it up on your LAN, you can do that. So that's different options, but if you wanted to run a server for the whole world off your laptop, you might want to get a really big laptop, and you're going to need to leave that running all the time. So probably use something like the cloud, which we're going to be using today with some Azure Web Apps, as well as using some Azure storage, which we'll get to in a second. So our web server is going to be made of Python and Flask. Flask is a pretty lightweight web framework for creating little web apps or bigger ones. Some cool big stuff exists on Flask. And we're also going to host that, once we've got it made, on Azure App Service via GitHub, I'm going to say, because we're going to link it up to GitHub. We're going to push our repo to GitHub, and then we're going to have it connected with continuous deployment with Azure App Service. So whenever we make a change and push it to GitHub, it's going to get synced up to Azure App Service. So we're going to get the latest version of our website. Now onto data. We've got a few different options. And when you go, oh, we're making a website, we're going to need a database. And that is probably the solution that most things would be using, an actual database, whether that's a relational database or another structure of database. But there are other things that get used in web app creation. Something like blobs or binary large objects are just a way to shove a bunch of files into a container in the cloud and go, I'll get that back later, thank you, and just a great way to interact with that. So if you were using something like a photo uploading web app, that could be a way that the photos are getting stored, rather than in a database, which is more for structured textual data, or it can link to different things like blob stored files. That's where you'd actually store those photos. You could also, if you were doing a local implementation of something, especially, just using files on your local computer would be a great way to go. But the issue with that, potentially using that on a cloud scale, is we do want to make sure we have what we call persistent storage. And using files, if we're not committing them to our repo and we don't have a way to store those files, such as in a blob, we need to make sure that they have a way of not being volatile and going away when we deploy the latest version of our new, like if we push a new version of our repo. So we need to consider that when we're choosing our database or data storage solution. So thinking about our project, we just need to store RSVPs. So what does that look like? Well, we've got an invitation. Maybe if you're thinking like a Facebook event, you can say yes, no, or maybe I'm attending this event. And then we have a list of people who are or aren't or potentially are attending. So what would that look like if we went with a relational database? That could look like something like this. We'd have to have a bunch of different tables. We'd have all the people who are using the site, all the different events that are coming up, and then we've got event responses. So these are going to be linked to the different users and to the different events. And we're okay, every time we create a new RSVP, we create a new line in this table, which have to reflect these two different other existing tables. So that's definitely what you want to do on a big scale of thing, because databases have things built in that mean that multiple users can be putting data in and taking data out at the same time. And that's great when you're using it on a large scale. But if this is your first time making a web app, it might be a little bit more complicated than what you need to do to kind of get the feel of what making a full stack web app is. So does it need to be so hard? Really, what we want to do is get a list of attendees out. Maybe we don't care if people say no, and we're just not going to give people the option to be wishy-washy and say, maybe I'm going to come. You got to commit when you're coming to one of these parties. So you're going to hit that RSVP button, and then you're going to get added to a list of attendees. Then when we have a list, we can just put that in a TXT file. That seems good to me. And then we're going to push that up. So we're going to add an RSVP every time we get someone saying, yes, Jack's going to come to this birthday party. We're going to get that post request when we set up those different routes. We're going to go, hey, web server, Jack wants to come along. Then we're going to go, oh, okay, cool. We're going to make a file or add to the end of an existing file. And then we're going to push that up to Azure storage, to our blob storage. So that's going to be there. And then we can also grab those files whenever we want to use them, update them, or display them. So those are the bits of technology we're going to be using to get started with. So let's get ready to go. You can grab my code from this repo here. I'll chuck it in the chat as well if you want to have a look at it. And then also you can grab the live series, the live web app at, nope, I apparently can't post to the thing. So someone else, if they want to chuck those in the chat, that is up to you. That's fine. But yes, the deployed app, if you want to play around with it and see where we're going with this is at aka.ms/invite-app. So we've got those going, and you can set this up in VS Code or code spaces when you get going. I do say here, this is my finished repo. It definitely has some more work. It could be done before, you would consider it a done project like any more CSS, but that's really up to you in terms of what you want to see with your eyes. And maybe you really like that form that I created. But let's get started. We have, firstly, we're going to talk about setting up our Flask web app. So we're going to have a file called app.py. This file, firstly, we need to import Flask, our web framework. We're going to set up Flask. Let me grab my little pen tool. Here we go. So we're going to import Flask here. We're going to then invite people, we're going to create this app. So this is creating an object. This is like, later we're going to then run the app here. And then that's the basis of what we actually need to have a web server that's running. Currently doesn't do anything because we do need to put the routes in. So let's get on to that. Routes are the kind of part that's the end of the URL. You would have seen these when you look at a URL. Like if we have something like invitationapp.com, you might have /make-invite. That is a different route that you want to go, hey, when I go to the make invite thing, I want you to do this function on the backend. And that is likely to give me the web page for that, or it could be something else. You can also include data in your paths here. So I've got view invite, that's the path. And then we've got name equals Renee is the data that we're passing through as what we call a query string. So we've got a bunch of different ways we can interact with our URLs here. Whenever we send something through to a route in the backend, we need to make a request. And there are different kinds of requests. And the one we're going to be using is the GET request the most. The GET request is saying, hey, I want to get this web page. And then we're like, oh, sure, I'm going to give you some HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and you can go and put that together yourself on the front end. But one we will be needing is the post request, and this is a way to send data to the server. Finally, I'll note there's a few other things to make sure you're always safe and only give the permissions that you need to a route. When you only want to be saying, hey, people can get a web page from here, only let them do that by saying, yeah, this is a GET request. If you want to add post because you expect to receive data there, that's great. But if you have delete, patch, or put, you are going to let people delete or change data potentially when you're not expecting it. So make sure you're aware of what you're setting up with your different requests types there. So we're going to make our first route. This one is going to be what we call the index, which is just the slash. It's just, invite app / nothing else. So when you go to the home page, you might say you're going to get the form.html, and this is going to show us that beautiful form we saw earlier. But let's check out that HTML as well as the live web page to see what it's doing. So jumping over to, let's see that route first. This beautiful route is right here. That's all we've got. And then we can go over to, we're going to say render the template. We have to grab that template. They live in the templates folder. That's just the Flask structure that you should use because it will automatically know where to look for the template set. Also, if you use the name app.py, when we deploy it to Azure Apps Service, then it's automatically going to go, that is the server file that we need to look for. So let's go into form.html. It's a really basic form. And we can see it's a form. We've got a few different labels and fields. So this is our drop-down menu with our different styles. And we've taken in some different data for the event name, who we're sending it to, the date and the time, and who it is from. And finally, we're going to have that button to make the invitation. Beautiful. Then we can also go and have a look. So you can actually run this locally. Let's go back to our end file here, and we can just hit run in the file. And then if you're using it in code spaces, it does all this magic where it's just like, cool, you can just open that in your browser right now. You can also just do that from VS Code. It's all really great. And then you now have this beautiful form where you can start doing stuff. Terrific. So we've got a form there, which is terrific. But what's going to happen when we submit that form? We're going to get something we call a query string. You might have seen this when you do like a Bing search and you say, hey, I want to see some pictures of cats. Then it's going to, okay, rather than just putting the words pictures of cats somewhere into the internet, we need to put it right into our query string so it's held onto right there. So you get this Q, that's the name of it, which is short for query in this context, but you can put the name of whatever name of that variable you want to put there. And then ultimately you get pictures of cats. These are my cats, so being very cuddly there. So let's have a look at actually what comes out when we are submitting this form. Okay, so we've got a beautiful invitation here, but don't worry about that for now. We can actually see in here, we've got view, which is going to be the next route we put together. But we've got a bunch of different information that's come through from that form saying the style is kids. I know this is really small, so I'll read it out. The event name is birthday party. We're sending it to friend. The event is on 37th of October at 3 p.m. and the sender is from Renee. So we've got all that going on. How do we actually get that out? Where is that getting used? Because it's actually not getting rendered here on the front end. We can have a look here. If I go inspect element, we can see that birthday party on 37th of October, it's actually already in there. And this is not getting compiled on the front end. This is actually getting templated and put into on the back end and getting sent through. So let's have a look at how we get that data out. We're going to have a look right here. So when you start making your routes, you might want to go, oh, okay, I want to practice before actually getting the data out. I'm just going to send through some dummy data that I've hard coded in. So you could do that. But once you are ready to send data that you're getting from the form, you're going to want to start doing something like this. So we can say, okay, cool. We want to get the request and get the arguments. So those are those different query parameters there. We're going to grab those. I'm going to get the one that was labeled to or labeled event or date or sender. We can grab those out. Then we can process them however we like. Maybe we want to make them all caps, or we want to like remove all of the vowels, whatever you want to do. Potentially you want to create an event ID like I'm doing here, so I can identify that the event ID is the sender and the event name. And then you can send those through. I'm also saying, okay, cool, I'm going to grab the style and I'm going to grab the appropriate template for that, because we do have slightly different templates for our different event graphics and how they fit onto the different graphics. And then we go render template. We need to pass all of that information in. So right here, I've gone and I'm going to show you the template in a second, but we're going to pass all this information in because we want to show it on the invite when we send it out, and any other information that we might need to store in the back end or just have on hand. So we've got that there. You can also put this into a singular object like a dictionary, and then you can access that on the front. But for now, we're doing a pretty basic thing, so I'm just going to dump it in as individual variables. So where does that go? It's going to go into a template. Let's see how that looks. It can do things like put variables in. It can do if statements, or it can do loops. So to start with a basic example, we could have a dear name. Thank you for your kind donation of amount, and then tell you some other things about the next event and say the sender's name. So it's a standard template that you're going to fill out, and that's going to get done on the back end when we pass in that information. We just need to know how to structure it so that all gets done right. So let's go and see how our template for our invitation is working there. So we've already seen our beautiful kid-style invitation. So let's go and have a look at that one. So we can firstly say we've got our CSS coming in at the top here in our head section. So we've got different style sheets for the different ones because that's making them have those different aesthetics. And then we have some text, and this is where we get to use our variables. So we've got our to, so whoever the recipient is going to be is labeled in the to variable. We've got the date and the time and the sender, and we've also got the event name here. And these are all in curly brackets, these double curly brackets here. And that's going to slot in the different variables we've passed in when we render the template. While we're in here, I'll also point out a couple other things that are not templated in here, but we will need to know about them for when we get to the RSVPs in a second. So at the bottom here, we can see we've brought in this script. That's going to bring in the JavaScript RSVP function that we're going to want to use whenever the button on the bottom gets clicked that currently says, I'll be there. That's our button. Our RSVP button has that text. And then whenever that gets clicked, we're going to call the function that's set on click. This is going to happen. We're going, okay, cool. We're going to send RSVP, and we're going to provide the value of the person who is RSVPing and the event ID, because we need to be able to look up the correct file for the correct event, and then add the name of the person who's just RSVP'd. We'll also, once that's done, we're going to want to show something that says, great, we'll see you there. And we're also going to disable the button. So we can see this is currently set to hidden is true. So we're not going to see that until we change it using JavaScript to make it apparent when we have actually RSVP'd. So those are what we have going on in our template at the moment. Okay, so how does this actually all come together and look pretty? We said earlier it's going to be the CSS. So let's take a quick look at the CSS to see what it's doing to make this look a lot better, or at least a bit better than our form does, which doesn't have any CSS currently. So let's take a look. It's going to be in the static file where we put things like CSS or JavaScript, which aren't getting changed, which aren't getting rendered. They come into here. And we're going to go to our kids style here. And we can see that there's not that much going on. This is the whole file for how wonderful it looks. It's actually not that much CSS, I'm going to say. And what's going on here is just some colors and font selection is going on here. So we want some pink font. We want different sizes for our headers and for our paragraphs. And then we want to have this fun background image, which has all these colorful bubbles and stuff. And we're going to set the size of it and make sure we have some padding because we don't want it to get all cluttered and filled up with text. White space, or in this case, colorful space, is important to make something aesthetically pleasing. So that's all that's getting done in our CSS. We do have a few different ones, and we do have a different background image for each of those. So that's how we're actually getting that image in there. It's not coming through in our HTML. It's coming through in this CSS here. Okay, so we've now had a look at that. But what else do we need to do? We need to add that RSVP functionality with the JavaScript. So let's quickly take a look at the JavaScript code as well. That is also in the static folder in rsvp.js. So this is all the JavaScript we have for this website. That's all we need. What is it doing? As I said, we can grab an element. So we can say, hey, I want that RSVP button once it's been clicked, because this function is only getting called when that button gets clicked. Then I'm going to disable the button because you can't RSVP more than once because we just don't want to be adding your name over and over again. And then we're going to get the see you there text, as I said, that was currently hidden. We're going to now say that it's no longer hidden. And finally, we're going to send that data. As we said, it was the event ID as well as the name of the person who is RSVPing is going to get sent back to the backend. And we're going to do that by making a post request to the web server and sending that through as some JSON. So it's a bit different than when we submitted our data as a form before, but it's not too different and it's pretty easy to get this data out. The great thing about using JavaScript for this is it means we can stay on the same page and we can just update the page to reflect that we have RSVP'd without leaving to go to a different new page. So that is the benefit there, as opposed to the form where we submitted it and then we moved on to the next page where we had the form data had gone into our invitation that had been rendered. So two different workflows for data passing there. So that's what we've got going on there. And let us see how we go about setting up this post route for receiving that data before we get to storing that data. So let's jump across to the code. That is in our app.py file again. So this is just going to be another route. As I said, we do have routes for all of our pages, but we also have routes for, this is like an API call. So we say, okay, I want to call some functionality, but I don't want to go to a new page. So we're going to set up our post request route here. And we can also get back any data from this as well. So ultimately, firstly, we want to start by receiving the data. First thing. Then we are going to split out the data because we have currently in there, we've got both the event ID as well as the name of the person. And we're going to assign those to two different variables, which we're going to use. And then we're going to start getting to the part where we store the data. So that part here is all we needed to do to set up our post request. And maybe you just want to print out in the console who's RSVP'd, and that's all you want to do for some reason. That could be it. But we do want to store our data. So we're going to need to get to what are we going to do with this data now that we have it? But we have already set up our post request and got our data out. As easy as that, which is pretty great. We just need to, use the request.json library there to get it out. So let's take a look at how we're going to set up storing this data. And if you were storing this locally, you could just store it in a file, which we will be using in a second. And you'll see that I have a bunch of different files in here for people who have RSVP'd to things. And if you were just doing it locally, you wouldn't need to go and store all of this stuff on the cloud at this point. You could just like, I'm going to go and make a file, just open file name, and then write a new line to my file, append to the file that already exists or something like that. But because we are doing it a different way, let's jump into what we're going to do with that. I'm just going to close up some of these windows because we have had our time in those files. Okay, so jumping back to here, what are we going to be doing? We're going to set up an Azure Storage account. We're going to push a file to Azure Storage in Blob form. And we're going to also be grabbing any files that we have there already so we can update them with any new RSVPs. So the first thing we need to do this is create a storage account. So I'm in the Azure portal here, and you can search for Azure storage account, and you're going to find this one with the happy green image there of a table, and you're going to create one of those. So jumping in here, we can hit create, which is great. And then we can now go across. Oops, sorry, got the spinning colorful wheel of death. Hopefully that'll go away in a second. But in a second, we're going to be just doing the basics of setting up the different parameters of making a new file. So we're going to be setting the name. Here we go. Maybe we've got some lag going on. This is possibly fine. There we go. Okay. We're going to set up we're going to choose our script description. You might have a resource group already for this. So I've made a resource group that's just like Web App Basic, which is what I'm using for this project. And I'm going to put both my storage account as well as my web app in there once I create that as well. I'm going to give my storage account a name, which for these accounts, they do need to be all just one word, no hyphens or anything. So if we're going to put that in there, I'm going to choose my local region or wherever you want to deploy it. And then I am going to choose the most minimal option from redundancy, because I do not need this to be open all the time and have multiple backups. It'll be fine if we don't. Okay, once we've done that, we can now go across and we want to enable public access from all networks for this example only. So before we do that, I'm going to say, do think about what your application is. If you're making a little toy app like this and you don't have any important data, making a public access for all networks is probably fine, because there's nothing interesting that people want to grab in there. And they still do need the key and the connection string to gain access. But if you do want to make something that's bigger and better and might have important data, you might want to use a virtual network or create private endpoints for it, where only specific things or within a specific realm can access the data. So you don't have even the opportunity for somebody else to be accessing the data if they somehow got your connection string. Okay, next up we have we're ready to make our storage account. We hit create and we wait a little minute to get ready for that one. And then when we are ready, we can go across in the portal that's now be like, hey, your storage account is here, and we can just search for key, and we want to find the connection string. This one here is what we actually need. I'm going to copy that out. Obviously, not obviously, it's important not to share your connection strings or your keys with other people, because that is what gives you access, as I was saying. And anyone who has this connection string, if you do have that public endpoint open, then can now access your blob, and they could put whatever they want in there or delete things that you have in there, and you don't want that. And generally, always practice good key security when you are using key-based authentication, or you can consider managed identities that will allow you to lock things down more on a per-user level. But for this purpose, using a key is a nice way to get started and understand this process without having to get extra stuff happening.
Renee, we're coming up on time.
Oh, okay, cool. Okay, great. Give me 1 hot minute, and I'll just show you. We've created this area here. We're going to put our key into a end file here, and then we for our local development purposes. So I've just popped that in there, and you can now access that key locally. When you do it for deployment, we'll show you quickly where you can put that somewhere else. We can then make a storage container, which is going to be like, this is where all the blobs live. And then we're going to be able to pop in our RSVP. We're going to call our container name RSVPs, and we're just going to create that resource if it doesn't already exist. Okay, now we need to talk about how we push those blobs to that container. You're going to need to have the Azure SDK, just a nice way to interact with the library. And when we now push through things in the code I'll show you in just a quick second, we can see that they appear in the container. We've seen that container set up here in the portal, which you can see in the storage browser. You can then create the different files there, and we can actually look in the portal in there to view or edit the files, and we can see an RSVP list sitting right there. So let's grab the content out of, let's pop some data into one of those blobs. Last quick look at the code before we look at our final part, which is we can see in here, back into it, have a helper function which we call sync blob. And basically all we're going to be doing is seeing if we can grab the blob. So we're going to connect to the blob client, which we have the container name and we have our file here. But above, quick look here, where have we gone? We've got our connection string and we're connecting to our blob service client there. So once we've connected, all we need to do is say, hey, I want to download a thing. And then if it's there, it'll be like, great. If it's not, it'll be like, oh, that resource doesn't exist. And then if it doesn't exist, you just upload a new one. Or you can just change the one that you have out. So we can either download the file. Sorry, where is the download line? We're going to download the blob, then we're going to update it, and we're going to push a new blob, or we can just, so we've got our delete and upload blob there, or we can just upload a new one. So yeah, that's as easy as it is to upload something to your blob storage, which is fantastic. So now quickly across to how we are going to deploy this, which is super easy. Once again, we're in the Azure portal. We're going to say, hey, can I have a web app this time? We're going to say, here's the resource we want to add it to, so our resource group, and we're going to give it a name. We need to connect it up to GitHub. So we're going to say, hey, we need to set the runtime, which I've got Python 3.11 set here, and my local area, and choose the most basic, cheapest plan possible because I don't need anything else. Then for our continuous deployment, we need to click enable here. That's the most important part. And then we can say, okay, here you need to log into your GitHub account here and say, hey, this is where my repo is. And then I want to deploy the main branch. And now we're ready to create. And all we need to do is once it's deployed, it will be here at this link. But before we do that, we need to add that connection string for our cloud deployment option to our environment variable. So you can just search for variable in the search panel there and create a new one and say, hey, this is the name of the connection string, and put it right in here. So that's all you need to do. Then you can see the status of your deployment here in the deployment center. And then once it's ready to go, you can go there and click through and you can have a look at that at this link that I think people have already dropped into the chat. But yeah, it's all live on the web right there. And if you want to see more about this, you can go and see the full, this is the whole series. This is not the link to the live one. You can go and see the full series of where I do a lot more on how to do all that in a lot more time. So yeah, that's all I have for you today. And thank you for my extra couple of minutes that I've stolen. I can't hear you, Dawn.
Not too many extra minutes. I started talking on mute again. Not too many extra, but you went through it so much. And so Azure wasn't my first deploying solution. I did a couple before, but I absolutely needed a blog post or something to step through and figure the whole thing out. So I'm sure that this was really helpful, and especially since you went through how to connect like use cases and the internet and all the way to deploying to an enterprise cloud solution, one of the most popular frameworks that people are using for web development, and Flask. So we have a quiet chat, probably in awe. So no additional questions, but I appreciate you being here, Renee.
Absolute pleasure. I hope people got a lot out of it, and I look forward to listening to the next talk as well.
Yay. We'll chat soon. You have a great day.
Thank you.